here we are. I'm Tom Osman, and this is Whatever Comes Next, the podcast where I explore the world of underground and independent music making. And on today's episode, I am joined by multi-instrumentalist and vocalist Leila Abdul-Rauf, who earlier this month put out her sixth record under her own name, Andros Insidium, on 20 Buck Spin. And it's a very powerful and atmospheric record, both in terms of the vocal performances, which we do get into talking about in terms of how she constructed some of the songs, but also the instrumentation, the atmosphere, the general kind of tone, and the layers of different textures on this record are very effectively put together. So yeah, I've been immersing myself in this record, and it's always fun to get the opportunity to get the artists to dissect the music, to get a better understanding of it. There were some interesting connections that I wasn't fully aware of, partially aware and partly not, in terms of other people that I've talked to before. So I was aware of the fact that Leila is a long-term collaborator with Dave Brenner of Gridfailure. And you can go to episode 103 for my conversation with Dave talking about that project. Also, I was aware of the fact that Leila is based in Oakland, California. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. I talked many, many moons ago, back in May of 2024, or at least that's when I put it out. So basically, almost around about 2 years ago, I spoke with Luca Indrio, frontman for death metal band Necrot. And I thought, oh, you know, they're both Oakland-based. They've probably crossed paths with each other, not realizing that, in fact, Luca used to be part of Leila's death metal band Vastum, as well as, yeah, basically every member of Necrot has got some kind of connection of working with Leila, which I thought was cool. And yeah, I guess I need to be a more diligent researcher to figure these things out before I start talking to someone. But there we are. Great thing about having a very distinctive name like Leila Abdul-Rauf is if you want to find her online, whether it's for Instagram or Bandcamp, whatever else, you just have to type in her name and you will immediately get there. You can get Andros Insidium on vinyl and CD as well as digitally. You can go to her Bandcamp page, or rather, I think it's actually on the 20 Buck Spin Bandcamp page. You can also go to 20 Buck Spin directly on their website and their web store. That, I believe, is all that needs to be said about that, more or less. You can follow me at Tom Osman Sounds. You can go to my website, tomosmansounds.com, for my music. You can find me on Bandcamp. You can find me on Ampwall. Oh, yeah, and I suppose one other incidental thing to mention. So this interview was conducted when I had just recently come back from a trip to Berlin, which is not particularly far to travel, but there was a bit of a saga in getting home, and then I had to work very early the next morning. And then Leila very helpfully was able to move this interview to later in the day, because I ended up having a clash with another interview. And so by the time we had this call, it was pretty late at night. So if at certain points I seem like I'm a little bit away with the fairies, that's the reason for it. But by the power of editing, I believe I've managed to chop out most of the bits where I'm rambling, which I guess I'm doing now. So, Leila Abdul-Rauf, take it away. I'm pretty terrible with geography, and I'm particularly terrible with US geography. I have interviewed members of Necrot, who I believe are from Oakland, California. You also, I mean, you do a lot of different music. I know you do some metal. You've probably crossed paths with Necrot somewhere down the line.
Some of them were my bandmates at one point.
Ah, you've seriously crossed paths with them. So is that in Vastum?
Vastum, yeah. Yeah, so both Luca and Chad were in Vastum at different times throughout our 16 plus years of history.
Ah, oh, that's very.
Yeah.
I'm always fascinated with these kind of interconnections of different musical worlds. And
And
so,
then Sonny, the guitarist of Necrot, volunteered in my video that was just premiered, my solo video.
Oh, right, with the title track from the album.
That's right.
Oh,
He's one of the sets of bloody arms you see dangling about
oh,
in
there
the
you
in the
go.
video. Yeah.
It's a small world. Well, there was another incredibly coincidental thing that I was going to bring up later on, but yeah, well, talking about that as a starting point, it's that is an intense song, and that is an intense video, and I guess kind of like a centerpiece to the album. So, in terms of the sort of overall concept of the forthcoming album, when did you start putting that together?
We filmed that video. That was Marcel Marais of Tritonia Films. She directed and produced it last July, so it's been a little while. But that's because we didn't know when the album was going to be released, and we wanted to have it complete, before the album was released. So it just worked out.
And in terms of the writing of the album, like when did you start working on that, and how much did you sort of have a an overall concept of it when you started writing material that would then end up being on the album?
So this is album number 6. Solo album 6. I'd say in general, most of the time when I write a solo record, it comes together pretty quickly between the inception of the concept and then concepts, plural, and recording, production, and then the finished product. I'd say on average, the writing takes no more than 3 months really to get that together. Lately, so the past 2 records were the first ones I didn't produce myself. So those were mixed by 2 different people. Well, let's just talk about this newest album. Was Greg Wilkinson at Earhammer Studios in Oakland. And so, so that it takes a little more time when I have an outside person mixing and have to work with another person's schedule. And then there were all the guests I recorded for the record, which was very exciting. And then that takes a bit of time as well. But this album, I started writing it right as I was working with the visual artist for the cover, and the cover was completed before the album was really written. So I used the cover to really guide the writing, and I wanted it that way. I had an image in my head, and I wanted to be able to see it, so it would help me write. So Justina Kozaczak, the artist, she's from Poland, uh, got that together pretty quickly, and I'd say a couple of months at the most. And then the writing was probably another few months after that. So this time, because of the guests and the production, the whole process was about 8 or 9 months.
Yeah, it's I wanted to get into asking you about the production as well as the writing and the recording of it. It's like overall, it's an incredibly powerful atmospheric record. I really like the way that the title track sits within the flow of the record, because I think up to that point there's so much going on instrumentally that is really rich and really draws in the listener. Like the some of the sounds that you've got on Stripped Before the Eye of Death, like towards the end of that track going into Eros Anima, I was listening to this on my headphones and I was just like, oh, this is like some sort of Dead Can Dance coil kind of immersive experience. I was really loving it, and it feels that there's so much going on as a sort of a world that you're getting drawn into, and then when you get to the title track, it's so stark that's such a powerful contrast the way it flows together. So I wonder how how as you were sort of putting it together, how much did you have a sort of overall vision of the complete sound that you wanted to have?
I know that every time I write something, there are always going to be tracks that are more dense than others, and others will be more stripped back. And I like that contrast because that's what makes an album dynamic, is having a mix of both. I think when I was writing, I think I knew Eros Anima was going to be a really epic cinematic track with drums and just a bigger sound than maybe some of the other songs. So sometimes I know, and sometimes I don't. Sometimes it's just I know as I work on it what seems to be sort of the most captivating elements of a song will help me sort out in my head whether it's going to be something that's more stripped back, like piano just sort of lends itself to, it's such a songwriting instrument. It fills a lot of space, but it also it's very easy to have something stripped back on piano and vocals. So the title track lent itself very well because the piano track was like the bass. So yeah, but the first track I wrote on the record was the piece with the throat singing, Senex Rule. And
I was going to ask about the throat singing as well. Yeah,
I thought that was going to be the intro to the record when I was first working on that horn part. It's sort of call to arms kind of sound. I wanted something, an intro that was like, it was like a calling, and it sounded like it could be ancient and futuristic sounding at the same time. That was sort of the main goal with this. Like, because you have, there is Mesopotamian concepts and
I mean, how there is so much in a sort of like listening to the record. There are so many aspects where it could be relating to some kind of mythology, or there could be some sort of ritualistic aspect or some sort of religious aspect. I mean, how much were you drawing from specific movements or mythologies?
Well, the mythology aspect really came from the book I was reading that influenced the whole album from an emotional standpoint, which is Descent to the Goddess by Sylvia Pereira, which was a book written in the early 1980s. She's a Jungian psychoanalyst. I heard she's actually still alive at 92, so that's amazing. And basically the premise of that book was a clinical companion of how to empower women through ancient divinities and using that in a modern clinical framework. And I'm not a psychoanalyst or a psychologist or a clinician or of any kind, but I am interested in psychoanalysis, and I actually do work at an institute for psychoanalytic training in San Francisco. So that book just floored me. It was the kind of book that, like, I would read it, I would reread the chapter, and I felt like I was feeling like something was starting to form, but I had to keep rereading it to sort of absorb it. It's a very short book. I don't even know if it's 100 pages. It's like really, really short. And but it hit me so viscerally, and tying in these Sumerian goddesses, the goddess myths, was it was just, I was like flooded with these emotions and imagery and my own feelings of being a woman in a patriarchal society, and it all just fit together, and it just I was like, this is an album in the making. So
would it be like a sort of a reasonable representation to think of the title track as being like a revenge fantasy?
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah.
And is there a catharsis in this revenge fantasy?
There is something satisfying about. I definitely there was definitely sort of a release when I wrote that, and performing it is extremely satisfying. I did test it out on a tour that I did last fall, and it was sort of like definitely the track that people remembered the most. And it's almost, it's like, it's sort of an expression of futility in a way too. So there's this catharsis, but there's this like well, here we are, uh, in this world where we're disempowered, and so you can think of the goddesses as like sort of the heroines in the song, but it's really coming from this very, deep in the shadow kind of place.
Yeah.
So it's not a happy track. I mean, there is a revengeful part to it, but it's fantasy too. So
Yeah.
it's sort of like an unrealized fantasy. And I really had an interesting time recording that track because I wanted the vocals, especially the screamed parts, to be really visceral and almost desperate sounding, and not like when I do this style vocal, especially in Vastum, it sounds so commanding and in charge. And when I first tracked the vocals in Andros Insidium, they sounded too commanding and in charge, and it didn't feel right for the song. And I wanted it to be like more of a shriek, more of a like I'm trapped in a prison kind of feeling. So I said, what can I do to make it sound like that? And so I ended up inviting a friend of mine into the recording session, and I asked her to punch me as hard as she could in my body, not in my throat because I had to sing, but somewhere along my, chest, shoulder, forearm area. I just said, go at it as hard as you can. And then I'll hit the record button really fast and we'll get this track. It took a few times, but we got it. And I think it worked.
That's a fascinating insight because I was thinking, I was listening to the album a little bit earlier tonight, and then after that I was listening to some Vastum, and it put me into a completely different kind of world, like powerful in very different ways. And I completely get what you mean about the difference in the looking for a different kind of impression with the vocals, because I was thinking, listening to Vastum, it is so powerful and sort of maybe epic's the wrong word because that makes it sound like power metal, which it's not at all, but epic in the sense of like now I've forgotten their name. Morbid Angel. It kind of like makes me think of that like grand scale. And I was thinking when listening to Andros Insidium that the vocals are visceral, but they don't sound like metal vocals necessarily. And so I was thinking that obviously there are lots of people who don't listen to metal, or if they listen to music that's sonically heavy, as soon as you get kind of like abrasive vocals, that's like really off-putting. There is something that's really confronting about these vocals, but I wouldn't say that they're metal. So that's kind of interesting for me, the way that it's possible to do something that's really visceral and intense, but not necessarily metal as such.
Yeah, absolutely. And then there are lots of vocal tracks on that song. Like it's mostly vocals and it's mixed in a certain way. There's some that are more death metal, sort of in the background from the really high, shrieky vocals. And then there's sections where I'm choking myself. And that's all, that builds tension throughout the piece. And so it's more like theater than recording a death metal album. Although recording a death metal album can absolutely be like theater too. But I think in this case, you have this quiet piano, melody looping about, and then with the the arpeggiated synths, coming in, and it sounds more intense because of what's around it. What's surrounding it is dialed back, and you have all the reverb and the different. You have the sort of the chant, the more melodic chants over the screams, and so it's sort of highlighting them in a different way.
Yeah. Another sort of reference point that I thought listening to the album, and then I saw it mentioned in the press release, was Diamanda Galás. Is that a direct inspiration for you?
Definitely an inspiration. I don't know about direct.
I
It's
guess
hard to know what's direct, but
when I say direct inspiration, I don't necessarily mean that you think that her music particularly comes through stylistically, but just if that's someone that you've listened to and felt particularly inspired by.
oh, sure. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, she's definitely one of many influences.
Have you seen
Um,
her perform?
I have, yeah. Trying to remember when that was. That was 6 or 7 years ago at this point.
Okay. Talking about inspiring performances, so I saw an interview with you where you were saying that let me just check when it was. Yeah, it was from 2011 Wrocław Industrial Festival in Poland. You saw a performance of Soviet France that was apparently kind of a major inspiration for this whole project.
Project.
So because I think you were performing with a different band at that time. Tell me about what was so inspiring about this performance that you saw.
Yeah, yeah. I think that was like a 2-day festival, and the band I was playing in at the time, Amber Asylum, was playing on a different day. And so the day that Soviet France was playing, I really got to absorb the set because I wasn't busy trying to get ready to perform. And it was so immersive. I think at that point I hadn't really seen sort of more of a large scale performance of an experimental ambient act, and how they would do that live and how they would make use of a space. I think it was like this large stone church or some kind of cathedral that it was happening. And I don't remember if they had 2 or 3 people on stage, but it was so just, I mean, the way the textures for one were huge, but just the way because ambient could be, live, maybe it's not always the most interesting thing to watch live, depending on how things are composed or improvised. These seemed like compositions. I'm not sure if they were improvised, but it had so much flow to it. And it wasn't like you didn't, there were all these arcs and peaks and they did it so skillfully. And it was so inspiring that to listen to something so immersive also be, not get boring or not have like sort of this dead space where your attention drifts. I was 100% riveted throughout this whole performance. And I think maybe at some point I knew I wanted to like try something out. Like, I didn't know anything about DAWs, any kind of recording software. I was like, well, I know I have GarageBand on my computer. Um, and then immediately when I got home from that festival, I started tracking what would become Cold and Cloud, the debut album from 2013. And yeah, absolutely. They were very inspiring.
So then, how much through the course of your solo work have you been involved with the production and the recording side? Because I think you said up until this album and the one before, you'd at least been you'd had some major involvement in the production side of things.
Yeah, so the first 4 albums were completely recorded, mixed uh, by me, and mastered by Miles Boyson, who's a really fantastic local musician and engineer. And then as soon as I decided, starting with the fifth album, calls from a Seething Edge, I knew I wanted to make this big change. I wanted just a bigger sound. A lot of it was a practical decision to be actually heard in a venue where people are speaking loudly over your set. You don't want to be able to hear them. And that had been a common occurrence with earlier material, earlier performances. And I said, you know what? This time I want drums, I want heavy synths, big epic vocals, and then this time, some screaming, so that people will just shut up when I play. That was the number one reason that I made that change. And then it was just more challenging compositionally, but it was something I was up for. But then when it came to the mixing, I said, well, I don't have the skills to do this myself. I need to hire a real engineer and make it sound big. So
Yeah.
yeah.
You've just made me think of something really incidental. So I'm a huge Swans fan, and particularly some of the records with Jabot on them, like some of my absolute favorite music ever. And so I have over the years quite obsessively tried to track down, even just different live performances of shows, just to like sort of get the, because I was too young and I never had a notion of seeing Swans in the 90s or the late
Hmm.
80s. And I don't remember which one it is. I think it's one of the semi-official albums. I think it might be Kill the Child or something like that. There's a particular track where they're playing, and it's very quiet, and it's that era where Jarboe, I think, was being brought out at the start of the sets, and she would essentially do some sort of like a cappella performance, or there would be very sparse synths. And the way it's recorded, the microphone is near some people who are just chattering away, and then there's like this blast of sound, and you can hear someone at the front go fucking hell. And I just thought it was great to get that, like, that moment where they just weren't ready for this oral assault that they got hit with. So that would have been I would have liked to have
Yeah.
experienced that.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah. I didn't get to see Swans until post 2000s myself,
Yeah.
after Jarbo wasn't in it anymore. But yeah, I can only imagine.
So, in terms of the way that you mentioned that you have already performed at least some of these tracks. What's your setup now on stage for performing this music?
Well, it's pretty stripped down. Instrumentally, it's literally just a keyboard controller with my laptop, my trumpet going through an effects loop vocal, and at this point, lots of costumes.
Okay, so tell me about the costumes.
Yeah. So I'm getting this together now. I'm actually about to record a video in the desert with for Eros Anima, and it's going to use some of the costumes we're using for that. But I had these special filigree sort of metal masks made, very intricate designs that are blind masquerade masks with these giant sort of crowns on the top. And I plan to have. It's probably a little too early to go into specifics about this now, but I do have some special guests who are going to be performing vocals with me at the record release show in May, the end of May, and just very like sort of ancient garb and sort of these lots of scarves and masks, things covering the eyes, things covering the head, and then projections, visual projections.
Okay,
So some of the visual projections are going to be ones I sort of strung together from uh, friends of mine that have sort of donated little films for me, and I time it with the music. I'm going to be doing this show at the Stanford University Center for Computer Research in Music and Acoustics. They're doing this sort of live stream and live performance for me, and so I have a whole video ready for that, and then I'm going to have like live visual synths as well for the release show. And we're also going to premiere the video at the event. So
cool.
you'll get that experience, and then you'll get the live experience after it.
And so the release of the album is the 17th of April, is that right?
That's right.
And so when is this release show going to be?
May 30th in Oakland. It's actually the same space where the Andros Insidium video was recorded, was filmed at First Church of the Buzzard, which is a this DIY sort of warehouse space that's really like decoed out with, you know, black lights and headless mannequins and all sorts of weird paraphernalia on the walls, and it's a very cool spot.
I was going to say First Church of the Buzzard sounds pretty macabre.
Yeah, yeah, a lot of macabre shows of different varieties happening there,
And
and
I was
all ages.
okay. And I was realizing as well, you've collaborated with David Brenner, on his Gridfailure project, haven't you?
Yes,
So you were on the
multiple
you're
times.
yeah, because I think you're on the latest record, but you've been on other records as well with him. So how far back do
I
your
think
collaborations with him go?
that's a good question. I'm trying to think how many we've done. I know it's been at least a decade, and I think there might have been three. I was in one of the videos that he put out in the past year or two. Uh, it's at least three at this point. Maybe there's more that I'm forgetting. I know we did something with my ex-partner Nathan and Dave, the three of us. I don't think that ever saw the light of day, but I think I'm on at least two or three proper Gridfailure albums.
Yeah. I believe from talking to him about Gridfailure, I think he has a whole lot of different bits and pieces of recordings and various stuff. So maybe there are other collaborations with you that will see the light of day somewhere down the
It's
line.
hard to keep track of. I just had this memory, especially during the pandemic, when I was just sending him like song after song, and I don't remember what ended up getting used and what didn't. Uh, he would send me when things got finally mixed. He would send me a mix, but yeah, it's been so long now that it's hard to remember.
Yeah. So how, in terms of the various different projects that you have had and you do have, how how active are they? You know, like when you're focusing on your solo work, is that you're kind of like this is the thing, or do you tend to sort of think of having several different active projects all at the same time?
Well, it's hard to have one project that's busy enough that I'm doing it, for more than a few months at a time. Usually there's like a busy period, like like right now, um, it's a it's the solo project that's getting most of my attention with the album release and the upcoming gigs and whatnot. But then once that, and then I have a tour booked for the fall that's in the works for the fall, and then that'll sort of die out a bit, and then I'll go back to another project. So it just depends. Like Vastum has a gig next month, the week before my solo show. So um, that's going to be a lot of switching gears that whole month. I'm going to be pretty actively working on both projects. So
Yeah.
it varies.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so on that topic of the amount of your time that's being taken up with different projects, so are you fully in the music world in terms of like what you do to make a living?
That would be nice. I live in one of the most expensive areas in the world, and no, so I have a job at I think I mentioned the Psychoanalytic Institute,
Of course, yeah.
and so that does pay the bills. I make some money at music, but it's not nearly enough to live on in Bay Area, California.
Yeah. It's one of these topics like because part of what I'm particularly interested in when I do this podcast is the practical side of being an artist, not from the sense of wanting to reduce art to commerce, but just to get the insight of what it's really like for artists who want to actually, get financial remuneration from the time and the effort and the work and the money that they invest into these things. And I think when I was a child and when I was a teenager and I was just a music fan, I think I would see bands in music videos and I would hear music on the radio and I would just kind of naively think like, oh, they're a pop star. Obviously, what we're talking about here is not pop music as such, but even for bands that I would see like in the charts at the times, years later, I would realize, oh, being in the charts doesn't necessarily mean that you're making a living from this. So it's yeah, it's disappointing, but on the other hand, it is interesting for me to sort of see the ways in which people make it sustainable to be artists.
Absolutely. I think it all depends on your goal, right? Like what's the goal with the project? Um, David Byrne, Talking Heads, he wrote this book, How Music Works. I think it was probably written in the past 15 years or so. And I think more editions have come out. But it still holds pretty true. There's a chapter in the book about the music business, the business side of being a musical artist. And there's this, he talks about this continuum of, independence and artistic control is at one end. And then at the opposite end is financial stability, and like basically almost no artistic control at the opposite end of the continuum. So most people want to be somewhere in the middle. I'm probably more on the DIY end of things because I'm not getting sponsored by anyone, but I have creative control over my sound, what kind of material I want to make, is basically at my own discretion. And as you bring more money into the equation, you become more and more of a corporate brand. And so you're doing great. You don't need your day job, but you don't have that creative control that you would at the opposite end.
Yeah. How important to you, whether financially or just artistically or aesthetically, is the physical side of the music to you?
The physical,
As in, making CDs, vinyl.
records, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I'm old school. I need it. Like, and I think it also depends on the project. Like for my solo work, I love the artwork. I love being able to hold that cover in your hands. I love colored vinyl. I love that whole experience, reading the credits, the lyric sheet. And I have an electronic project. One guy's based in London, the other guy's in New York. It's a trio, and we've never released like physical product. Well, actually, we put out one tape for our debut, but that was it. And everything, and they're not into physical formats either. They are just like streaming only. We don't want to sell any. We don't want to make any money off anything. Of course, they have careers as scientists, so they're basically, making twice the money I'm making. But so it just depends. I think a lot of it depends on the genre. Like I find in metal and punk and even the stuff I do on my own, there's more love for vinyl and for the T-shirt. And
Yeah.
so yeah.
And from that point of view, with your solo work, and when I do write about bands, which I, less and less these days, I do reviews. I prefer doing interviews and doing features, but whenever I am reviewing a record, one of the things I always find most difficult and torturous is trying to talk about genres. But how would you actually characterize your solo work if you were forced to kind of describe it in simple terms?
Right. Like how do you want to market yourself? That's really what it comes down to, right?
Yeah, because I guess,
Yeah.
there's when I discover music that I think like, wow, I don't know how to describe this. I think this is wonderful. I love this. But then I think from a commercial point of view, that's really hard because then how do you sort of describe to people like how they should understand it from a musical point of view?
Totally. Yeah. And I've been sort of pigeonholed in this ambient category. And yeah, there's a lot of ambience, but especially the last two records, I changed it up a lot. And there's vocals, there's rhythm. It's not really, you know, I was thinking about this the other day. Like I'm too ambient for the metalheads. I'm too metal for the goths, and I'm too goth for the ambience. So, I could be somewhere in the middle of all of that. But I think one thing that ties all of those records together is cinematic. I think I make cinematic music that's sort of freeing because you can be cinematic in so many ways. And there's something about cinematic music when you're watching a film. It's all about drawing out the emotion from something being acted in front of you, and that's what I want my music to do. You know, really like to be the soundtrack to your life.
Yeah. No, I think
Yeah.
cinematic is a great word to use. And I've had this sort of thought before when I've been listening to music that is very powerful, um, but also sometimes very harsh, not necessarily again in a metal way, but like, maybe it's very noisy or it's kind of just very, very strange. And I think a lot, if you imagine this being a movie soundtrack, if you approached it on those terms, it would probably be something where you could I mean, justify is maybe not quite the right word, but it would be understandable to an audience in a way that if it didn't have that notion of being for a movie as such, people might go like, oh, this is crazy, like why would I choose to listen to it? It's kind of like within the notion of a movie or something being cinematic, it's kind of like you can view things differently.
Absolutely. That's a sort of indirectly a big reason why I like to perform with visuals, because even though the visuals sometimes are very abstract, they give you sort of this focal point when you're watching the performance. You're watching this multimedia, you're watching these different media interact, and it's almost like watching a film, and then you're seeing the performer. Uh, but you know, I'm one of those people like the more synesthetic type, you know, where I see sound in colors and vice versa. And I think there are more people like that than you would think. But I think there's just something about the visual with this sound that makes it more of a whole entity.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So when you do have this tour, which you said you're sort of putting together at the moment, is that going to be in North America, or are you going to be coming over to Europe at all?
Europe is in the works for next year, and October is will be North America, East Coast.
Okay, cool. So, and do you have beyond the release show, do you actually have specific dates set up already, or that's all still to be confirmed?
Well, there's the one at the Stanford Karma that I told you about, the Center for Computer Research and Music. That's June 11th, and so I have to quickly. I'm putting together a completely different set for that than for the record release. So that's a very different audience, people that are much more into the experimental side of things, the more abstract, avant-garde end of sound, which when I play for people like that, I like to really play up those elements because that's something I don't get to do as often at like a club, you know, where I'm playing with bands or, you know, loud artists. So it's nice to be able to play in this like sort of sit down space, and it's recorded, and you know, it's a nice sound system, no one talking over me, and I can be make it really dynamic and abstract. So I'm looking forward to that. But yeah, the show's in October. It'll be sometime in the early part of the month, and we're putting together the tour package.
And in terms of where you keep information up to date about tours and anything else, where's the best place for people to go to?
Social media, Bandcamp, I think lists. I list gigs on Songkick, so that'll usually populate in the on the Bandcamp page.
Okay,
Yeah.
nice. Well,
Yeah, I don't have an old school website. I think about doing it, and then I think about the time it takes to get something that's actually compelling to look at and updating
yeah.
it. And yeah.
Yeah, I've mentioned this before to people when doing interviews that I made a website and it's got some things on it and I have in my calendar a little reminder every week like update the website and then usually I just go like just skip that till next week.
Yeah,
Um,
that would be me too if I did that.
yeah. Anyway, I won't keep you no longer. Thanks you so much for your time. I'm really enjoying listening to the album. I hope it gets a great reception when it comes out, and I will be keeping an eye out for European shows because yeah, I'd love to get the chance to come and see you play live.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And thank you. I know it's late where you are, so I appreciate you talking to me at the late hour.
My pleasure. Thanks a lot.